Hey, folks, welcome back to the Pulse. My name is Matt. This is Crypto Heartbeat. It's 2 o'clock Central Texas time. And, folks, I wanted to talk to you today about money, God, and politics. Folks, it is a big, big day. We are one day ahead of the election, November 5th. And, of course, this is all of social media is going bananas. This is the last ditch effort to convince people to vote for you or your candidate. And folks, it's interesting because I've been making some observations, and I'm going to be sharing a jam-packed show for you today. So I'm so thankful that you are here because I think you're going to really appreciate this perspective. I believe that we are experiencing and witnessing another great awakening. If you're familiar with the Great Awakenings in the 1790s and then in the 1860s, in America, there were great awakenings, and these started with prayer. And it's interesting if you look back into the history of most of the colleges, higher education institutions that were created on the East Coast, they actually came out of the Great Awakenings. And these were times when institutions, there were so many young men in that case, that's how they would describe it, who were converted, became Christians, and to have a place where they could go to learn and to become essentially part of the clergy. And that was a really interesting time. And if you go back into the origins of many of the colleges and universities at the time, including Dartmouth and Yale and Princeton and Harvard, you will find this origin story, and it comes out of a real supply and demand. There was a lot of those who were converted. And there was one man by the name of George Whitefield. And George Whitefield was a contemporary of Benjamin Franklin. In fact, he was a friend. And the first building that was constructed at the University of Pennsylvania was actually for George Whitefield to preach in. He came across the ocean 6 times. And at that time, it was not easy to cross the ocean. He had a booming voice. And of course, there are many, many stories about George Whitefield. But there's some great sermons of those days. And it's interesting. There was a movement of God, and at a time when people were awakened. And of course, we know this concept of wokeness and being awakened. And today I want to talk to you about this convergence that we're seeing. And I'm going to make some references here because I saw a video, and a shout out to Kadium for sending it over to me. But I'm going to start with a video. Tucker Carlson was today on the War Room with Steve Bannon. And he was asked about this spiritual experience he had. And I don't know if you've seen this in the news, but Tucker Carlson came out saying that he had a spiritual attack that actually crossed into the physical, which is very unusual. But he shared that. And, Steve Bannon wanted to ask him about it. And it's his commentary on that I think is a sign of our times. And we're seeing this all over the place. But to have people like Russell Brand, Joe Rogan, people like Tucker Carlson, who I would not consider to be the paragons of faith, these aren't the guys who you would expect to be theologians. And certainly they recognize that they're not. But there's something happening. Something's afoot. And of course, in all of this tension comes these real questions. And so I want to play that. And then we're going to talk about some other things. But we got jam-packed. There's amazing things I want to share with you today, but a perspective of what this all means. Because so much of our crypto world is driven by money. Right? Get the money, one Lambo, all of that stuff. And of course, if you tune into Crypto Heartbeat, you hear this repeated. And this is really ultimately, we don't worship men, right? And we don't worship money. But what's interesting is money's really important for us to function. And so we talk about the history of money, we talk about the origins of this, but today we're going to talk about the convergence, this money, God, political convergence, because we sit here at a very pivotal time in human history. And I think it's absolutely imperative that you understand the dynamics, because these dynamics go back very, very far back in history. But it also relates to what you could expect to see here potentially in the coming days, weeks, and years ahead. So welcome back. I want to say hello to my friend Sam Kemp. What's up? Fascinating. Yep, we're going to talk about that. Hex on Air, good to see you. Rich Liberation, let's go. True Blue, welcome back. Let's go. Kadium, thank you for the link, my friend. DGen Hexen, Trump 2024. I don't mind losing, but if the left cheats, it's a different story. Well, yeah, that's going to be interesting if they do. It's going to be an interesting dynamic. So Let's jump into the content, and then we'll chat about it. But let's watch this together.
Then at Fox, you've been very hesitant in the past to talk about your spiritual journey or to talk, to get off topics of politics and culture and power and media. But I was fascinated about this revelation of this event that happened in your life. Do you think that there are deeper forces at play here? Is this more than just Steve Bannon and Tucker Carlson and Elon Musk and a bunch of guys running around talking about in this material world, politics and beating Democrats and taking on the intelligence, legal, financial apparatus? Is there something deeper going on here?
Well, Breitbart, who I was just thinking about yesterday, what a good man who's been gone for, 12 years anyway, I think, used to famously say that politics is downstream from culture. Culture is downstream from the spiritual battle. So not only is the battle in the unseen world, not only is it part of what we're seeing, it is actually what we're seeing. We're seeing the physical manifestations of something that's been going on for eternity. As for why I don't talk about that stuff, I mean, on the one hand, I'm a WASP, sort of trained not to talk about that kind of stuff. And no, it's just true. It's a cultural thing. You just don't talk about money or religion in public ever. It's hard for me to talk about it with my wife. And for another, I never want to hold myself out as some paragon of virtue because I'm very non-virtuous and have led a pretty spotted record, I would say. So I don't want to discredit in any way the faith that I have. But I will say, yes, I have experienced that personally. That sort of popped out in a conversation I was having with an old friend of mine called Scooter Downey, and it wound up on camera. I was a little bit shocked to see it. But yeah, no, I was on February 20th, 2023. I was attacked in my bed by a spiritual being and clawed and left bleeding and scarred. And do I understand what happened? No, of course I don't. I don't really understand anything, but that did happen to me. I don't care if people believe me or not. It did. And I think it was just a momentary glimpse of something that's happening at all times, which is, again, this war between forces that we can't see, but that has been ongoing and has been, in fact, described by every culture since the beginning. Every culture that we know about has described this battle. And in fact, it's been the basis of every religion. It's certainly the basis of Christianity, which I think is true. By the way, factually speaking, I think Christianity is true. But even if you don't, I think you can acknowledge that we're the only culture that hasn't been really absorbed in thinking and talking about this. Not since we dropped the atomic bomb in Nagasaki, the second one in August of 1945, and decided that we were gods and the God himself no longer existed. Since then, we have been a secular society, and that's why we're now being destroyed, in my view. But even if you don't buy any of that, you have to acknowledge that we're living in an anomalous time. This is the only period, these 80 years, where people haven't been daily discussing the spiritual battle around them. Every other culture has. And in fact, the remote ones still do. And they're all right and we're wrong. And the big change in the moment that we're living in is people are awakening to this fact that we've been on this vacation from reality, a vacation from spiritual reality. And of course, it's not just a part of what we're seeing, it's definitive. And I'm not just saying that anyone who disagrees with me is evil. I'm not saying that. I have been evil many times in my life and unfortunately will be again. So I'm not, again, I just want to be really clear that I'm not sort of holding myself up as like, as a great person or a perfect Christian or anything like that. But this exists quite apart from me or my behavior. It's true. And now it's sort of unmasked. And anyone who's paying any attention at all, I mean, look, if you're making the case that, sometimes we need to have an abortion, okay. If you're making the case that abortion is an affirmative good, you are evil, you're practicing child sacrifice. And that is exactly what they're doing, as every culture before us has. But to see the Treasury Secretary, that dwarf, Janet Yellen, get up and say, you can do your part to help the American economy by killing your child, that's no different than the Canaanites, actually. So if people who don't see that clearly, that's exactly what it is. Worshipping abortion, the killing of kids, not as something that like needs to happen, unfortunately, but as something that is good, that's pro-abortion. People, and I have to say, I'm sure I'll be attacked for saying this, but I really believe it. People are like, oh, well, we had another hurricane, must be global warming. No, it's probably abortion, actually, just being honest. Like, you can't do that. You can't kill children on purpose, knowing that you're doing that in exchange for power or freedom or happiness, whatever you think you're getting in return. You can't participate in human sacrifice without consequences. You just can't. Sorry. I'm sorry to say that. Trust me, I'm a secular person from La Jolla, California, who was baptized in the Episcopal Church. And if I can see that, if it's obvious to me, then I think it's very obvious to a lot of people.
Well, how is that event then? How has it informed your life today and what you're trying to do? Because I find this the most of all your insights and things on politics and power and everything like this. I'll be blunt. I think this is the most profound, direction of your thinking. I mean, when I read the other day, I would say, wow, because yes, Tucker is a wasp. Tucker's one of those guys. He's not going to get emotional. You said about me not whining. You don't hear Tucker whining. He's not that type of guy. I think this is absolutely fascinating. How's it informed, not just your life, how's it informing you as one of the most significant figures, public intellectuals on the world stage?
Well, I mean, I think it's just reminded me of what I don't understand, which is always a good starting place to wisdom. I mean, if you seek to be wise, not just informed, which is simple, but to be wise, to make sense of the facts that you've accumulated, which is the goal of adulthood, then you really have to begin with a profound understanding of your own ignorance, lack of foresight, with your own lack of wisdom. The root of wisdom is knowing how unwise you are, I guess is another way of putting it. And this has just reminded me of that. This happened to me. I don't really know what it means. I have a lot of suspicions, but I can't confirm them. It was spiritual. I'm positive of that. I know that. But what does it mean? I don't know. So it's just very helpful to be reminded of all that you don't know. It's very, very helpful. And human disasters always begin in the same place, which is in hubris, which is in the false certainty that you know what's going to happen. You know the consequences of something. You know what the future will be. And you know that you're God, basically, is what you're saying. And this is just another reminder to me that I'm not. So I'm really grateful for that. Second, I would say it's another reminder of what the goal is. And the goal is to get right with eternity. The goal is not just to win an election. And elections do come and go. I think this is the most significant in the history of the United States. That's obvious. The crimes being committed against the country are more profound than any time. The open border invasion is a larger crime that's been committed against than Imperial Japan or Nazi Germany committed against the United States. It's the worst thing that's ever happened to the U.S. That's my opinion. But it's still nothing compared to, I don't know, the end of history or eternity. And so it's just important to keep your eyes on the bigger prize, on the only prize that matters. The only question that matters is what happens when you die. And it's crazy to me that I haven't spent every day for the last 55 years meditating on that I grew up in a culture that actively suppressed questions like that didn't want to talk about death, that considered any conversation about what happens when you die offensive or out of bounds. I can't believe I grew up in a place like that because it's so dumb. It's just ridiculous, actually. The only thing that unites every person on earth is death. That's it. That's the only thing we all have in common. Every one of us, we will die. And so the fact that we're not daily discussing what happens then is just like insane. Trust me, that's like a secular, rational position on it. You don't have to be a Christian or religious in any sense to acknowledge that that's just true. No one ever talks about that. And so I just want to approach this election with that perspective. And that event, that attack on me has helped me to do that. So again, I'm really grateful for it. I wouldn't change it if I could.
All right. So Tucker Carlson's a great example of this, but he's talking about this spiritual attack that he had that became physical. He's got like claw marks on his back and all that. It's really fascinating to me to observe how many significant people within this kind of alternative media, which is rising significantly. I'm sure you're very well aware of the fact that it continues to become more and more common. You know, folks like Russell Brand's a great example. The conversations that people are having in public now. I think you probably saw someone that was in the audience with Kamala Harris saying, you know, Jesus is king, and her saying, you must be at the wrong rally. I want to break this down for you today, this convergence that I'm seeing, and really the perspective as it relates to crypto and money and what's coming up. And I'm going to finish with an article that was written by Whitney Webb that just came out. It's called The Chain of Command, and it is a fascinating read. It's a very long article, but it really describes to you what's happening with crypto and what the battle is really for. And if you care about money, you care about where things are headed, you need to pay attention to that. But it also illustrates the need that we have for a truly decentralized blockchain, a truly decentralized alternative financial system. And if you've listened for very long, you know that's what I believe that this Richard Hart ecosystem is. It's an alternative financial system, and we build that together. But what are the requirements of it? What do we need to do in order to secure this alternative financial system? I think it's important for us to understand what the basis of this is. What are we really fighting against? And I thought it was really interesting that we've been on a vacation from reality, as Tucker said. What he means by that is throughout history, people have talked about the fact that there is a spiritual battle. It is one that is unseen. And of course, he talked about since 1945, you drop a bomb, we have become gods. And of course, he talks later in that article about Oppenheimer, quoting Vishnu about being a destroyer of worlds and what this power looks like. And for those of you who follow me on Fridays, we do Right Side Up in honor of Steve Staggs, and we talk about this. Well, I put these words in order for a reason. Money, God, politics. Who is the money God, and are we following the money God? It's really interesting how people are seeing these things come together. But I want to point out something real quick here, and this is Ephesians 6:12. It says, "For our struggle is not against flesh and blood." That's us, right? In the natural, we hear flesh and blood, people. For our struggle, it's not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Sorry about that. So our struggle is not with each other. And of course, this is what the battle is for. If you think about it, the battle is ultimately for how you think. And what's happening right now in the political sphere, the battle is for, they're trying to convince you to vote for them, right? This is a battle for your hearts and your minds. And of course, in the United States, there's relatively two options. But what's amazing about it is the underlying all this throughout history up until 1945, every culture was talking about this, that there was this other spiritual battle that was going on. And I want to break down for you something that's really significant that most people don't know. If you don't know your Bible, you kind of miss this. But if you want to understand how it's constructed, basically, how is this world constructed, and what are these evil forces? Who are they, and what are they up to? Right? What's the motive here? And I want to share with you. This. This is Matthew 4:1. So you've heard the temptation of Jesus. He comes out of the wilderness. So this is Matthew 4:1. When Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil, after fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. The tempter came to him and said, "If you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread." Jesus answered, "It is written, man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God." And this obviously is setting up this case that Jesus is not doing anything unless he hears it from the Father. And this is a model to us. It then says, then the devil took him to the holy city and had him stand on the highest point of the temple. "If you are the Son of God," he said, "throw yourself down. For it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, and they will lift you up in their hands so that you will not strike your foot against a stone." Jesus answered him, "It is also written, do not put the Lord God to the test." Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all of the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. "All this I will give you," he said, "if you will bow down and worship me." Jesus said to him, "Away from me, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only." Then the devil left him, and the angels came and attended him. What is fascinating to me is when you think about what these folks are awakening to, folks like Russell Brand and folks like Tucker Carlson, and there's many, many others, they're recognizing and seeing that this is not a battle between flesh and blood. And so we have this temptation of Jesus, like literally this example of three things. And I'm going to break it down for you. At the end of the day, Satan is wanting your authority. You have choices to make, right? If the battle is for your hearts and minds, people want to influence how you think. This is the idea in Romans 12, right? That you would not conform any longer to the patterns of this world, but you would be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And this idea of what are we renewing our mind with? And what's amazing is Tucker broke this down. He said there's a difference between being wise and being informed. And so much of what we're doing is we're following and chasing the thing. And so Satan himself, who is also known as Mammon, has a carrot on a stick. And that's this one Lambo thing. And what we're seeing is this convergence. And of course, we see this in money and in politics. We see this convergence that's happening, this movement that we see within the Trump campaign, this unity government or whatever it may be. Surprisingly, the topic of the spiritual nature of things is there, basically presenting people as good versus evil. What's amazing about this is if the battle is for your hearts and your minds, that means that you have something of value, and that is your choice, right? Your free will is what's at stake, and ultimately the souls of men. If that battle is for it. So there's a story, you probably know this, Cain slew his brother Abel. He killed him. And if you look back into the scriptures of when this happened, Cain slays Abel, obviously a very, very bad thing to kill your brother. But God speaks to him. You would think, oh no, here's this terrible sin of murder. And God speaks to him. He says to Cain, and I'm paraphrasing, he says, sin is crouching at the door. And what I think is amazing about that statement is the fact that sin is outside of this door, and you are the one that let it in. Think about that for a minute. This thing that we have control over, our own will, our own ability to choose, our own ability to think is really what the battle is for. And ultimately, the souls of men are contingent upon that. And so when Satan comes in the wilderness to tempt Jesus, what are these offers? These are offers of power, of money, of influence. And so I want you to see that throughout history, this has been the battle, is that Satan and his folks, the king of the air, right? This angel who took the authority, was given the authority in the garden, is literally promising things and giving in exchange for your authority power. And so what does it manifest in this world? With this financial system that we're in, that is extractive by nature, that is an illusion of scarcity, because those who have the systems of power, given the systems of power, have partnered with evil forces. And ultimately, they enslave people with the systems that they create. And so if you actually ask the question, why did God create? What's this whole thing for? God created his man, his woman, so that they would rule and reign with him in the fullness of his nature and character. And so when Jesus is tempted in the wilderness and he says, turn these stones into bread, he says, no. Man does not live on bread alone, but out of every word that comes out of the mouth of God. Meaning, I'm the vine, you're the branches. Without me, you can do nothing. And so this concept of who do we follow? Who is guiding this whole thing? What is this whole trajectory of this story? And so what we see is the folks that are out there kind of in the secular world going, yeah, it seems like it's kind of a good and evil thing. Seems like there's this battle and there's some good guys and bad guys. What's amazing is the observations of Tucker Carlson in other interviews where he literally says it's almost like there are people who are celebrating and they're anti-human. They're celebrating the death of things, meaning children or whatever it is, that there is this strange, deep desire. I don't know if you're familiar with spirit dinners and the things that Miss Abernaut, is that her name? Yeah, who is basically these spirit dinners and these things that were in a lot of the kind of liberal world has been a part of within Washington, is essentially wrapped up in these evil kind of sacrificial systems. And what's amazing is that you have to contemplate this for a second. Is there one who can tempt you that you would give your authority to, that you would worship, who in exchange for that would give you power, would give you resources, would give you money, would give you the ability to enable or to, these systems that ultimately enslave and extract? And so what's happening is crypto comes along, and I think this is really fascinating when it comes to the money, is this idea that the first time in human history where political power and financial power have been separated. In the past, you'd win a war, you'd kill the other people, you'd take their gold, and then you would rewrite the rules in your favor. And I think what's fascinating about that concept is that we have an opportunity in front of us. And for those that aren't worshiping money, and I want to share with you, something that I think is fascinating. There's a story of the rich young ruler. And the rich young ruler comes to Jesus and asks him, "Hey, what do I need to be saved?" And he's like, "Why are you asking me?" basically. And he says, "Hey, have you followed all the commandments?" And of course, the guy's like, "Yeah, I followed all those." "Well, what do I need to do?" He goes, "Well, if you want to be perfect, go sell everything you have and follow me." And of course, he was really bummed out and went away saying, "Well, man, I got to sell all of this." What's amazing about it is we're exchanging our authority for this power and resource. And we think that that's this success. But people across the board, those that have reached the very pinnacle of their careers, people have had the money, had the power, had the Lambo, had these things, feel empty inside. Because the real value is not money. It's actually purpose. And where does that purpose come from, right? Without me, you can do nothing. So all of the things you may accumulate, all of this money, all of this power, all of these things, you still are empty inside. And of course, this battle of those who have aligned themselves with forces, spiritual forces, have literally created systems and animated tools that are going to essentially benefit them and not others. And of course, in the context of God, within the scriptures, it says the disciples asked Jesus how to pray. And in this prayer, he shares the vision and the mission of the whole thing. He says, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, meaning you are the most supreme of all. And of course, if you acknowledge how people recognize God as a sovereign, omnipresent, omnipotent, omniscient God, you'd say, all right, you are the one which all knowledge, everything is under your control. Okay, so if you accept that, he said, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come. Okay, so this kingdom, what is this kingdom you speak of? Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. Where? On earth as it is in heaven. So there's this mission and this story about a kingdom that is coming. In this kingdom, we have a responsibility. Your kingdom come, your will be done. Not my will, your will. And we see Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane literally saying, hey, remove this cup from me, sweating blood. And what happens in that exchange? But ultimately, hey, how would the scriptures be fulfilled if you didn't essentially go to the cross? And Jesus is changed in that moment. And what we see in this story is ultimately one of the redemption of mankind. But what the promise of this is that we can literally go to him and we can know and follow him. And this is, I think, the really big key is the currency. Everyone's chasing the money. Everyone's chasing the power and all. And this is the lie, that this stuff is going to bring you peace. But the currency of God is ultimately peace. If you really boil it down, the currency of God is a peace that transcends all understanding. And of course, that's what people want, purpose and peace in their life. And they believe that, hey, if I had some more money, this might help. And in some cases, I understand that completely. Totally understand that, right? You're in a really tough situation financially. And if you had some more resources, things might calm down. You might not have creditors calling you. You might not have people knocking on your door. So I get that. But if you look at the macro and you look at what's happening within this world, we have systems that have been set up. And of course, what's the extreme that we see in crypto? We're like, oh no, CBDCs, central bank digital currencies, right? We see these government organizations wanting to take over the money even further, because right now, cash, you can actually spend that and it's not tracked. But what do they want? They want a digital dollar. And what does that come with? A government wallet, a digital ID, a social credit score. And of course, Whitney Webb, which is the article that's linked in the description, talks about this. And I highly recommend you listen or you read that. And we're going to look at it here in a minute. But the point is that there is an evil cabal, right? Satan is the originator of all of that. And it says you cannot serve God and money. These are two different masters. And they give different things, right? You exchange your authority for power. And so if you really think about these, the story of the crossroads, of the man who goes to the crossroads and sells his soul to the devil to be able to play the guitar, this is the quintessential story. And so as we see this good and evil thing, what are we seeing? It manifests itself in ultimately what Tucker was talking about. This idea, why is it that abortion or child sacrifice, why are these things of division? Why are those the things that are being carried by certain political parties and certain people? And it's really fascinating because what we're seeing is this populist uprising right now. We see this unity government. I never thought in my lifetime I will see a Kennedy and Trump together. But you have to understand what this thing is. This is a response, right? This is a response to all of this because it's very difficult. I mean, can you believe this? I mean, Tucker was pointing out the fact that Janet Yellen was essentially promoting, if you're going to do your duty from an economic standpoint, you're going to sacrifice your children. And it seems so blatant and so obvious, but not to everyone. But if you understand the origins of this, the battle is not between flesh and blood, folks. The battle is not between flesh and blood. And so if you're believing this lie, that, hey, if I just get the money, all the problems are going to go away. Well, not so sure that that's the case. Because what we're chasing after and what we're serving, we can't serve both. So we have to understand that money is just a tool. Crypto is just a tool. So what is it? Well, money, there's nothing that exists outside of wealth, which is a product of human labor. So think about this for a second. We as people created in the image of God have a creative ability that the animals don't have. Okay. The animal class, like my dog, does not cook me dinner, right? The dog doesn't, create furniture, doesn't do any engineering. We understand that difference between us and the animals. Interesting. I saw an article the other day. It was about how we have been doing sign language with apes and monkeys and all this stuff for all this time. And after like 60 years of doing this, teaching them how to do sign language, they've never once asked a question. And I wonder why that is. So there's something unique about us being created in the image of God, this ability to create and this ability to speak things into existence, because nothing that exists, no good, no service, didn't first start in the mind of a man or a woman. If you're going to do something, you get an idea to do it, and then you think through it, and then you accomplish it. But anything you look at, anywhere you go, someone had to think about first, right? And that is the creative ability. And so wealth is based on human labor. Back when we were more of an agricultural society, this was really obvious, because what you would do is you would partner with the creation, right? If God created it all, and if you have that kind of worldview, that God created all of this, well, guess what? When you take a seed and you put it in the ground, right? You scratch the ground apart and you put the seed in, you're partnering with the way the system works. And when that kernel of corn gets put into the ground, what comes up after? Well, a stalk of corn comes up, and it has maybe 2 ears of corn on it. Well, there's 1,800 kernels. So it replicates itself abundantly. It's an 1,800 to 1 yield from each seed. Well, if you look across all of creation, that recurs. The number of seeds that are produced are abundant. And this is across the board. I mean, you can take just about any living thing that exists out there. So the creation in and of itself is abundant. So what would be the advantage of the enemy to lie to the people, to essentially hoard and lord the excess? So a lot of people talk about this being a scarcity model, but in reality, it's an illusion of scarcity because the creation itself is abundant. And so when Jesus teaches the disciples to pray, we talk about your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. What does heaven look like? And these are the questions people have been asking throughout history. And this is what Tucker's pointing out. So there is an adversary and there is a liar, and that goes all the way back to the garden. And what is it? What is the lie? Give me your authority, worship me, and I will give you power. And what is the picture of Satan tempting Jesus in the wilderness? Ultimately, hey, do these things. If you're the Son of God, you can do these things, right? No, worship me, bow down and worship me, and I'll give you all of this. It's a model for us because that lie continues to come today. It's just in a different form, right? Satan isn't like literally before you with horns and pitchfork and red spandex. But at the end of the day, that's what the battle's for. It's for your heart and for your mind. And so the question ultimately is, who do you follow? And so often, I feel like we get caught up in the circumstances. We have such a narrow view of our circumstances. We're saying, well, money's going to fix this. Well, money may change your circumstances. But the question is, who are you following and what are you worshiping? What I'm excited about is in this awakening that's happening, people are paying attention to it. They're actually seeing it. They're like, wow, these people want to kill children. Wow, these people are worshiping Satan. And they're blatant about it. They're out front. It's clear. You could go into so many details about these folks thirst for human blood. Why? Because life is in the blood. And so when you think about this system that has been essentially hijacked, it's like an upside down world. We're looking at things through this lens and we're like, well, how do I get ahead? And pretty much all of the ways in which you get ahead is by stomping on someone else's neck to get yours. But what's fascinating about this whole Richard Hart ecosystem, this crypto thing, and why am I even streaming, is because I heard something that really rang a bell with me. This idea that, hold on, we could take back the system. Well, what I learned from my good friend Steve was that all tools are neutral. So think about this. A gun is sitting on a table in the middle of a room. Does the gun get up itself and shoot people? No. But what could you use the gun for? Well, I guess you could use the gun to hunt or defend your family, but you could also use it to shoot up a school. So guns don't do things, tools don't do things. People with a certain nature and character animate tools. So I see this guy, Richard Hart, right? And Richard Hart, what does he sound like? What do I notice? I notice a guy who's an advocate. He talks about wanting the glory. What is the glory? This guy's got all this money, doesn't need money, and he's doing something that is advocating for people not to get wrecked, right? But he's also promoting a system. He's a literally original Bitcoin maxi who's double clicking the exe file to get 50 BTC in a block, 50 at a time. That's back in the day when you could do it on your computer. So he was one of the original, Bitcoin guys. But he saw something, and he saw what has happened is that Bitcoin ultimately is being sacrificed on the altar of decentralization. And that's a quote from Axie's Alive, and he'll be on the channel tomorrow. What does that mean? People like Michael Saylor, and this article that I'll share with you from Whitney Webb, is all about the system and those who have decided they saw the opportunity of what Bitcoin means, and they've said, we're going to take it over. So just like we see in Jekyll Island, right? This place where ultimately we got off the gold standard and created this, this Federal Reserve system. It's the system of enslavement, right? We could go back into usury. We can go into all of the things, the Rothschild family. It's another fascinating thing when it comes to money. But people will use the systems to enslave. And so a guy named Richard Hart saw that there was an opportunity to essentially free the captives, because this is the first time in human history when financial power and political power have been separated. But if you don't animate the tools with the nature and character of God, meaning you're considerate of other people, and you understand that we need to get rid of middlemen, that we need no counterparty, that's the beauty of this thing. However, this thing is being captured. It's being captured by people who want to disproportionately benefit. Of course, in a system that's based on merit, you'd say, well, the more you invest, the more you should benefit. Certainly. And that's the case of your skills and abilities as well. But what's amazing is there are those who want to rig the system in their favor. And so they want to control the hash rate. They want to control the supply. And that's the thing that we're pushing back against with the Federal Reserve, right? Look at what happens, why inflation exists. There's many factors, but one of those is the changing of the supply of the initial amount of money. And of course, we saw that happen with the Charlie 19, right? 5 or 8 trillion more dollars were printed. And so what does that do? It debases the currency. This has been happening throughout history. People taking the amount of gold in things and alloying it, or changing the amount that's in it, right? So what's amazing is we're in this time where the money is changing to become digital, and there's another battle going on, just like the battle of the temptation, right? People are taking and animating the systems that they can ultimately so that they get power, and they get a disproportionate amount without the amount of effort. And so Richard Hart in this ecosystem is concerned about, hey, what if we were to have a truly decentralized ecosystem? Well, there are requirements. There are fundamental tools that are necessary to ensure that this is actually in the hands of the people. And it reminds me a lot of the origins of the United States. If you look back into the Federalist Papers and what they were trying to create, it's interesting, these fundamental things, right? One of the things that's amazing is, in the Declaration of Independence itself, it says, we find these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, meaning they were created by a creator. You don't get your rights from the state. They're not something given to you. So what's interesting is, to create a more perfect union, what do? Well, we set up these systems. They're created by us. We animate these systems that we think are going to be better for our life, our liberty, or our happiness. Well, we're in that situation again today. We're building an alternative financial system. Well, what does it need to be based on? Well, it can't be based on Bitcoin because it's been captured. So who's going to be out there building an alternative financial system? Well, I see Richard Hart. And what has he communicated? I got a chance to talk to him twice. And I asked him about his vertically aligned ecosystem. What is this thing? what is this vertically aligned ecosystem? Well, if it's properly decentralized with a layer one, it has the ability for you to build on top of it, right? This is all the tools and all of the tokens and all of the protocols that can be put on this layer one. It's a copy of Ethereum. If it's properly decentralized, it's got stores of value, it's got decentralized exchanges, it has, privacy tokens and zero knowledge proofs. Well, it needs to have a stable coin, and it needs to have the ability for you to swap for value. It needs the requirements for you to have the ability to get on and off, meaning fiat on and off ramps. And so this vertically aligned ecosystem is so critical for the future of not just you making a couple bucks to get a Lambo or me, but it's something way more important. And I feel like it's interesting if you go back to why were the Federalist Papers written in the first place? And in some respects, I feel like I'm doing the same thing that Alexander Hamilton was doing, was saying, hey, we want to write these papers that go in, that literally are essays that go into the newspaper so that people can understand our thinking of why we did it this way. Well, in some respects, I feel like this stream, what I'm trying to show you is at the very core of this is a very delicate thing, and it's very consequential. That if we don't understand what we're creating here with this vertically aligned ecosystem, if we're not contributing to it, we may lose it. And I think one of the most important things is you don't fundamentally basically sell out. And that's what we see so many of these people doing, is to get a buck, they will sell out the decentralized nature of whatever they're doing. But this is real vision, folks. And I think that what's amazing is if the tools are all neutral and they're animated with a certain nature and character, what's the nature and character of the people that are animating them? Well, Richard takes the Ethereum blockchain and copies of the full system state. Is this vision completely come to fruition? No, not yet. But if this group of people who I think are amazing, I've met Hexicans, Pulskins at all kinds of events, I believe that this is a group of people call it a cult sometimes. I think what's amazing, though, is to have a group of people who care about one another. And this is at the fundamental core of things. This idea of loving your neighbor as yourself, what does that actually mean? It means not that you forget your own self, it's that you're considerate of other people. Well, what does it look like in a financial system when people are considerate of other people? And I think right now, the system of Satan's kingdom is one of profits over people. Well, you can't have sustainability unless you've got profits. So what does this kingdom of heaven look like? Is it one in where we have sustainability of profits, but we also have the preservation of people? What if we were to align this with the very framework of nature that is abundant? And I think what's amazing is when you see it, you can't unsee it. Is that we have an opportunity to literally animate the tools of the blockchain in a way that actually can free the captives. And that's the underlying message of all this. The battle is not between flesh and blood. The lie is that it is between the blues and the reds. It's between the Republicans and the Democrats, right? These people are evil. No. You need to understand, when you read your scriptures, you notice something. Get behind me, Satan, not get behind me, Peter. What does it mean by that? Get behind me, Satan, not get behind me, Peter. Because people are created in the image of God. And as you see this, it's a decision that you make of who you follow. And that scares the heck out of the devil. You have this ability to choose, and he knows it. You can revoke this agreement at any time. And what I think is absolutely fantastic and amazing about this is that ultimately we can choose to go the right way, and we can choose to consider others in addition to ourselves. And what comes out of that but community? And what's at the core of community but love? And here's the strange part, which people I think laugh at me for saying. Richard Hart loves you. Strangely, he's not Jesus. He's just a man who's trying to animate a tool because he thinks it's going to be better for you. Wanting to make you rich. What does that look like? He's already rich. He really doesn't need to do this. It's interesting that he changed his name or uses the pseudonym Richard Hart. Isn't that interesting? Rich. What does it mean to be rich in heart? Well, I guess that's love, isn't it? Well, what does it mean to be thoughtful and considerate of other people? Well, I will assure you that if you're thinking about others in addition to yourself, what ends up happening? Well, it's good for you and it's good for them. Imagine being in a family where dad only is concerned about himself. How does the mom and the wife and the kids feel about that? Have you ever run into anyone who is extremely selfishly motivated? Yeah. What about in business? In business, we see this all the time. You've heard of win-win, but so many people out there are just concerned about themselves, right? They want to win and you lose. The great John Nash, he won the Nobel Prize for economics for his game theory. It was called Governing Dynamics, and a movie was written about this with Russell Crowe called A Beautiful Mind. And it was ultimately this concept that if I consider you in addition to me, we all win. But if I just consider myself, I may win, but you will lose. And I think that that's the governing dynamic behind the pulse chain. At least that's what I hope. It's our opportunity to create a vertically aligned ecosystem, that one that's truly decentralized, that in the future becomes an alternative financial system. And right now it's like, well, we just compare this to this. It's like, compare Solana to pulse chain. They're miles and worlds apart. Why? Because of their intent and because of their construct. The way that they are structured, truly decentralized ecosystem that is built with the tools and animated with a character that is concerned about you being able to transact without being oppressed by centralized players. And so this is the opportunity that we have with programmable money. But there's so many moving parts to this that we have to understand what it is in order for us to protect it. And right now, decentralization is kind of it's kind of a jargony word. Well, it's probably not super relevant right now, but it's going to be very relevant in the future. Very, very relevant in the future. Because the Bible talks about a time when you will not be able to buy and sell. And then somebody could shut you down. It was funny. I was watching MKBHD, the guy who does all the tech reviews, and he was looking at the new Meta glasses. And he said, this is really exciting. But he mentioned this wristband that they've created that basically enables you to do things with your fingers and operate the glasses. And it was the first time he literally said, hey, I feel like I'm seeing a new input device. I'm seeing something that I've never seen before. This is the future of computing. And of course, it's hard to imagine that. But what does it say? On your forehead and on your wrist, the mark. Well, do I know exactly that's what it is? No, but what's interesting is we're moving closer and closer to a world in which, there are ways in which they're going to be able to shut off money. If we go down this path of centralized money and CBDCs, and we just lean into this because we just want a Lambo. We just want, I want nothing. I don't want to remember nothing. I want to be back in the matrix. If we don't fight for this thing, if we don't defend this thing, and if we don't build this thing, then no one's going to have an opportunity to go anywhere else, because once ultimately they start shutting things down, there's nowhere to transact. So an alternative financial system doesn't seem like it's super relevant today, but for those who are awake and are awakening and understand that the battle is not between flesh and blood, this is an opportunity for there to be a kingdom economic system. But it requires that people are animating those tools in a certain nature and character. And it's based on the concept of caring about people in addition to yourself. Doesn't mean you have to kiss people on the lips or hug everybody. No, it means that you're considerate of other people because you realize you have to share this place with them. And it seems very practical. But folks, there are people celebrating the killing of children. If you look at the whole, child sex slavery thing, I don't want to go deep into this, but there is organ harvesting, folks. This whole human sacrifice is still alive and well today. You just don't see it at the corner store. But if you understand that battle is there, and of course, what would the enemy not want you to know? I don't want you to consider these things. I don't want you to think that. I want you to think that it's all, I don't exist, right? What did he say? What did it say in The Usual Suspects? The greatest trick the devil ever played was to convince man that he did not exist. And of course, we're seeing it. We're seeing it out front. We're seeing it up front and personal. So, folks, there is a convergence that's happening. People are following a money god. It's called Mammon. Satan. It's a system, and he exchanges power for your authority. Question is, are you going to hold back your authority? And are we going to contribute in consideration of other people and build systems that are animated in the very nature and character of God? And you're like, well, what is the nature and character of God? Well, there's a story in the Bible, and of course you hear this all the time, the prodigal son. What is that story? The story of the prodigal son is one in which this son wants the inheritance, the money. He wants the money now. And of course, you get an inheritance when your father dies, but his father's still alive. Can you imagine the audacity of going to your father and saying, I wish you were dead? That's basically what he said. And what did his father do? Strangely enough, his father said, okay, I'll give you this money. I'll give you this money. You imagine the father's like, yeah, sure. So essentially, the father's going to finance your debauchery. So what does the boy do? He takes this money and he goes and he squanders it in wild living. Just insert yourself there somewhere where you're doing this thing and you lose all the money. He gets a job because he doesn't have any money and he's feeding the pigs. And while he's obviously seeing the slop of the pigs and he's hungry, he thinks of his father's house. And his father's house is one in which the servants eat better than he's eating at that point. And he contemplates this. He's literally lost it all. And he thinks of his father's house and he understands the nature and character of his father. He says, I wonder if I went back to my dad's house. I wonder if he'd let me be a slave, a servant of his, just so I could get out of this situation that I'm in. And so he decides to go back. And on his way back, the father sees him coming. And you think his father would be pissed off at him, right? Nope. His father runs out to him and he literally meets his son, and his son says, Father, I have sinned against you and against God. And what does the dad say? My son, he was dead and now he is alive. We are being challenged to understand the very nature and character of the father's house. Ultimately, what does he get? He gets a robe. Well, that's pretty nice, right? He gets hugged and kissed by his father. They killed the fattened calf, but he also gets a ring. And this ring at the time represents authority because it was the signet ring, the signature of the father. What do you do with that? That's called authority. That is what the battle is for. Your authority to choose. And so why is the battle between good and evil? And why did God say sin, Cain, is crouching at the door? You must master it. Because if Satan was so strong, why is he outside the door? Why is sin crouching like a recumbent animal? Because it's outside the door. You let it in. This is the story of all of creation. You are created in the image of God. You just don't recognize the Father's nature and character, and you need to come back to the Father's house. That's what's happening. It's a new great awakening. People are seeing it for what it is. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. So right now, a lot of people are just focused on the money. And I want you to see that there's way more going on than that. This is an opportunity. And so what are we supposed to do? Your kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven? Well, maybe we got a responsibility of animating the tools and the nature and character of the Father. Says, I am the vine and you are the branches. Without me, you can do nothing. Interesting. That's strange that when Jesus was tempted and he said, hey, turn these stones into bread, he said, man does not live on bread alone, but out of every word that comes out of the mouth of God. Jesus was very, very clear that he only does what he hears from the Father. What would it look like if you only did what you heard from the Father? That's what I'm attempting to do with my life. And what do I get? Wisdom, not just being informed, but understanding the very nature and character and the framework of what's being created and what the lie is, and that it's not a battle between flesh and blood. Because I assure you, if you heard a car accident outside of your building at work or at the house, would you run out there? Probably. Because somebody's probably hurt. And you run out there, do you check who they voted for? Do you check with who they love? Do you only help people of a certain race or a certain gender? Nope. That's why it says, consider it pure joy when facing trials of many kinds, because this is where character is revealed. So when Trump turned his head and was shot in the ear, it was an interesting moment, because since then, I knew from that point in time he was going to win. But here's the most important thing, and I think that this is really, really important to kind of finish with before I get into the Whitney Webb thing, and that's this. When you're considering this election, and it's going to have wide sweeping impact for people across the world, what happens tomorrow? I want you to consider this. Romans 13:1. Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. You might not like the tyrant, but the tyrant may have been chosen for a reason, to get your attention. And if you know the stories of the kings, the good ones and the bad ones, and the good ones and the bad ones that happen throughout the scriptures, you recognize that there's this constant repeat of the human condition, in which we find ourselves in the situation of sackcloth and ashes, and we are crying out to the Lord. And I think we are coming into that time now. But the important thing for you to note is the fact that this election isn't just by happenstance. This is not just, well, I hope this works. Well, I hope, if they don't cheat. No. If you know the stories of the origin of the Revolutionary War and what was happening, there's a story of the guns from Ticonderoga that were dragged miles, hundreds of miles across the ice and snow by Henry Knox and others. And what's amazing about this guy, he was like a teenager, maybe 20-something, and he led a group of people to bring the guns over from Ticonderoga. And they put those up at night at Dorchester Heights in the middle of the night under a cloud, which was fog. And it was so unbelievable to them that we're out in, the ships were out there, the guns had been put up in one night. And of course, as they recount from the historical documents, that it was literally a miracle. And there's story after story of that, of the sovereign hand of God directing and guiding the path of his people. And I would say, folks, at the end of the day, we need to recognize the nature and character, and we need to contemplate and consider coming back to the Father's house. Because at the end of the day, who knows best? Because there's a lot of people out there that are like, I'm not into this Christian thing, but they would recognize that there is a creator. And we're seeing this more and more in the secular world, right? These things are converging. We're understanding the very framework of creation. And I think we're coming into a very interesting time. Well, one of the times that we're coming into, besides AI and UFO stuff, is we're coming into a time where the money is changing. And this is an opportunity for us to take back control, meaning return it to popular control, not have it controlled by centralized parties. And so you may be excited about the next 10 or 12 months being up and to the right, and so am I. But you would miss this huge fact that Richard Hart, I almost feel like, is on his own island, and people don't realize it. They're just, as long as you make me rich, I'm okay, Richard. And he's like, you guys are dum-dums. Do you not understand what I'm doing? And I don't think he's motivated by Jesus of Nazareth, but I do think that the hand of God has directed him, given him the idea to say, you know what? We need to have a place where we can freely speak, move, transact, have privacy. So if the battle's not between flesh and blood, what is being exchanged for the authority of the folks that are serving Satan? Ultimately, power, money. And so what ends up happening is you assume that there's this, you see on one hand the abundance of creation, and then on the other hand you see such scarcity. That's because people who have been motivated by their own, if you want to say, nature and character, have created systems that extract. I'm not suggesting for, UBI, or I'm not suggesting, communism. What I'm suggesting is consideration. Loving your neighbor as yourself. That's the golden rule, right? Basic stuff. But that's what's happening in this populist movement, is people returning to sensible things, like RFK going, hey, maybe we should bring a neurotoxin out of our water. These basic things, common sense, not so common anymore. I think what's fascinating is that this election that's coming up tomorrow, if you're in the United States and you're still considering who to vote for, which I can't imagine you'd be, is that in some respects, there's been so much built up here that essentially people have united around not an ideology of conservatism. That's what's amazing to me. Trump is not an ideologue. Barack Obama was an ideologue. But Trump is somebody that's ruled, it's a populist movement. Ideologues would be somebody that was like conservative principles or else, right? This is not what this is. You know, the conservatives would not be okay with an RFK type. They would not be okay with a Tulsi Gabbard type. But what's amazing is this kind of unity that's coming through. And why does it take a guy like Elon Musk, who is not supportive of this side? Why would he be so attracted to this? And why would he? Because he recognizes character. You remember when Elon Musk came out for Trump? It was the moment he got shot and raised his hand in the air and said, "Fight, fight, fight." What is that an indication of? It's an indication of character. What are you going to do under fire? How are you going to respond? It's a crucible, my friends. It is one that is refining. So consider it pure joy when facing troubles of many kinds, because you may be being refined yourself. And so what I want to bring to you in all of this is a perspective. And it's not super popular, right? Everybody's like, I just want to hear about how you're going to pump my bags. Folks, if you care about anyone besides yourself, you got family, you've got kids, you got grandkids, you got great grandkids. You need to know this stuff. This is exciting stuff. It's almost like being at the formation of the beginning of America, but this is global. This is the money, the future of the money globally. This isn't BRICS or SWIFT. No, this is separate from that. And we're building it together. And people don't see it. They're like, oh, you foolish hexagons and pulsicans and all this stuff. But if we don't have real leadership that understands this stuff, and Richard, in many cases, I almost feel like is out on his own island. He gets this stuff. He doesn't articulate it the way that I do, but it's the same thing. And I think it's for the same purposes, ultimately. Not so that Richard can just get rich. He's already rich. He's advocating for you. And at the core, that's love, concern, consideration for others in addition to yourself. That's the point. So now I want to share with you another article you have to read. If you want to understand this cabal, you want to understand what's happening to Bitcoin, you want to understand the threat, check this out. This is the new article by Whitney Webb and Mark Goodwin. It is on unlimitedhangout.com. This just came out. And this is called The Chain of Command, How Facebook's Libra, Bank Regulators, and PayPal Built a New World Currency. If you care about the details of what's going on, this is a historical account. I don't know if you're familiar, but Facebook, back in 2018, I believe, came out with this. They were going to do a coin called Libra, and who the person was that was behind that. And of course, if you look at Peter Thiel and PayPal and Facebook, this is an effort to hijack crypto and ultimately take it for themselves, right? So instead of it being the Federal Reserve and the United States dollar, is essentially hijacking Bitcoin and this decentralized financial thing for the benefit of corporations and ultimately this surveillance state. Facebook recognized in the early days that their data was the most valuable thing they had, because if they could control transactions through their Messenger app, and the guy that was in charge of this whole Libra thing ended up running the Messenger app, they thought we could integrate money with PayPal in all of this and try to, partner with Paxos and others to create this currency. And this article defines the very nature of why the battle is over stablecoins and essentially controlling the new dollar. Because if you can control it within this decentralized system, you can take back power, obviously, from the Federal Reserve. But the illusion is that they were going to do it because they wanted to free you. No, it's just another form of slavery. And I think if you're interested in all about the history of all this stuff, this is one of the most important things you've read. But I will say this, what inspired me about this article, and this article, it says it's a 115-minute read. I would highly encourage you to take the time out to do this if you care about this stuff. But I'm going to give you what I took away from it, okay? What I took away from this article is it galvanized me around this Richard Heart ecosystem, about this alternative financial system that we're creating. And one of the things that really came out of this was ultimately the battle over stablecoins. Why are stablecoins so important? Because at the end of the day, a stable coin, if you're going to buy or sell anything, and you are a person who is going to sell a product, or your point of sale, you're going to do something where you're going to receive currency. Because right now, cryptocurrency is actually a crypto asset. It's taxed like an asset, it stores value, it's an asset. But the real battle is what Bitcoin wanted to be, which was a payment system, right? A means of exchange. And because stablecoins are ultimately the thing that is the lowest common denominator, it's the thing that we can exchange because it represents, in this case, a dollar, right? That is so critical for this vertically aligned ecosystem. And I think Richard knew this from the very beginning. So if you're somebody that follows the whole PDI narrative, the PDI narrative is really one in which there would be ultimately a backed stablecoin that would be able to be utilized that's not tied to centralized players like USDT and USDC. But I think what's really fascinating is it's built on the back of the maker contract, because PDI is DAI, and DAI is created by users through taking your Ethereum, for example, and vaulting it within the maker contract and producing DAI, the stablecoin. This article helped me understand that essentially what it becomes is essentially becomes a deposit token. Whatever is deposited in that vault and maker is the backing for ultimately the stablecoin. And of course, you get yield for doing that. There's incentive for you to put that coin in that vault. Well, guess what that is? That's individual people essentially making the treasury. Because right now, what do you think? Things aren't backed by gold and silver anymore. They're backed by the good faith and credit of the production of the people. Well, guess what that narrative is? That narrative says the government has the ability to reach in your pocket and extract value from you at any time. This is what you signed up for, and this is what you're voting for. Folks, this is truly what we're doing here. People don't see this, right? And, we've got some great people communicating out there. But I will say this, guys like your friend Somi, who's one of the most prolific in our community that's communicating, I don't know if he sees this. Because what we're actually doing, the real narrative here, serves all people. Because guess what? If we don't do this, if we don't build this alternative financial system together, there won't be one. Because there's no one else out there with the cojones to do it. Richard Hart is the vision, and he's taken action. And of course, this doesn't even mention what he's fighting with the SEC and what the precedent of ultimately writing to the blockchain being free speech. Folks, tomorrow at 11 a.m. tomorrow, I'll have Axes Alive and Dan. I'm going to call him Dan Amicus, even though he goes by a different name. He's the one that put together the amicus brief where there were 50,000 signatures in support of Richard Hart in his case against the SEC. And then if you caught this really wildly successful video or series of videos I did the other day, which was on the courthouse steps, Axes Alive was just provided the most incredible commentary. If you haven't seen that, and a lot of people have seen that, he's coming back. And so I really encourage you to tune in tomorrow at 11 a.m. Central Time, where we dig into those things and we talk to Dan, who is he's the genius behind the amicus brief, and his observations. He called me, and they're pretty incredible. But we're going to hear more from Axes, who I'm sure has thought a lot about what he heard inside of that courtroom. Folks, this is a pivotal time. And to think that we've got a fighter, it's strange to me. It's almost like the guy who got shot in the ear and stood up, Trump, and said, fight, 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 is same as Richard Hart. He's doing it in a different way. He's been shot by the SEC, and he's putting his fist in the air, and he's saying, fight, fight, fight. It's amazing. So, folks, I hope that you see the convergence that I see. It's not a particularly popular topic, because for those who have ears to hear, right? Because a lot of people are like, old man, I just need my Lambo or whatever it may be. But I'm hoping that there's a group of people who recognize actually what's happening here. I got into Hex just arbitrarily. I saw a video, late night television at 2 a.m. It's like, do you want to get rich? And I'm like, okay, you got my attention. And so I put in some money, got in before big payday, 2 days before big payday. And, I watched this thing. I experienced a 25x in Hex. That was pretty exciting. Kind of crypto proved itself to me. But then when I saw what Richard was doing, when he said, I'm going to fork the the Ethereum blockchain, but I'm going to copy over the system state. I said, hold on, something's happening here. And then when he started talking about this vertically aligned ecosystem, hey, what does that mean? I got a chance to ask him in person, what is that? At least on stream. And then I realized what he did with that PMaker contract, what he's talked about with a layer one, with stores of value, with things like DEXs and privacy, and then ultimately fiat on ramps and off, of having this vertically aligned ecosystem that is truly decentralized is an alternative financial system. But when the CBDCs come, and they will come, and when the social credit scores and the government wallets, and it likely will come in the next tragedy when people are running out of money and they're like, your stimulus money is waiting. Hey, Pulse Chain Trainer, your stimulus money is waiting and you're out of cash. And you're like, well, how do I get this stimulus money? And they say, we're not going to send it to your bank account. Just sign up for our government wallet and we'll send it to you in the new CBDC. And it could be like USDC or something. You're like, oh, yeah. And now they got you. And that's what I see happening here, folks. We have to have an alternative to that. And that's what Richard Hart is doing. I see it. I see it very clearly. And I'm hoping to convince you to see it as well. That what we're fighting for isn't just, I think we're going to make a tremendous amount of money. I think we're going to see a massive, when all this stuff gets settled, after this election, we get through this stuff. In January, I believe this thing is going to go banana zone like you've never seen it before, in a super cycle. But until then, it's so easy for you to be tempted. Because what are you going to be offered for your authority? To give it away, just compromise your principles, just cut the corner a little bit. And it's a trap, folks, and it will trap you too. But I'm so thankful that we got somebody like Richard Hart that's, he's wicked smart, right? He's a kind of guy that's got the high IQ and, strangely enough, actually cares about you, even though he calls you a dum-dum. It's a crazy world we're living in. But we're contributing to something that we will look back on and will be as significant or more significant, in my opinion, than the actual formation of America. That's the kind of thing that we're defending here. And I hope this kind of content, represents that convincing to you that there's way more here than you just making a buck. It's cool when you make a buck and you contribute to the future of a new economic system. So thanks for joining the Pulse today. Catch us tomorrow with Axes Alive and Dan Amicus, where we talk about this Richard Hart SEC case, and we hear some pretty amazing things from Axes Alive. He is a superstar in our community. He's another guy that's way smarter than I am, and we're going to learn some things tomorrow. I hope that you will tune in for that. But thanks for joining today, and do not mess with Texas. Take care, everybody.